Welcome back to Mass Effect Revelation. This is Chapter 15. And I know you guys have been waiting a long time for this, but I've decided to give you something you never asked for. And I'm talking about visual aids, voice acting, and audio editing. So I hope you guys enjoy, and happy N7 Day. Chapter 15. Saren stood at the side of the hospital bed, looking down at the young Batarian woman fighting for her life. Though in her present condition it was difficult to tell what species she belonged to. Only the 4 orbs of her eyes gave her away, the only part of her anatomy not covered by the bandages that wrapped her from her head down to where her legs had been amputated just above the knee. Dozens of wires and tubes ran from her body to the nearby machinery keeping her alive, monitoring vital signs, circulating essential fluids, pumping in a steady stream of drugs, antibiotics, and Metagel, even breathing for her. Batarians were on the cutting edge of medical science, and the standard of care at their facilities was among the best in Citadel space. Under normal circumstances, she would be receiving around-the-clock attention from the staff, but apart from the 2 of them, the room was empty. Saren had sent the doctors and nurses out once they had updated him on her status, closing the door behind them.
You can't do this. She's too weak. She won't make it.
But in the end, neither he nor any of the other staff had the courage or the will to defy a direct order from a Spectre. Generally, Batarians were a hardy species, but even a Krogan would have had difficulty surviving the trauma this patient had been through. Her missing legs were the most obvious injury, but Saren knew her burns were the most horrific. Under the bandages, her skin would be all but melted away, exposing the seared flesh and charred tissue beneath. The biolab in the basement was growing skin grafts from samples of her own genetic material, but it would be at least a week before they were ready to begin reconstruction. The explosion would have scarred her internal organs as well, the pressure from the blast forcing superheated air and noxious fumes down her throat and damaging them beyond repair. Only the host of incessantly beeping machines kept her alive, struggling to compensate for the failing systems of her body while cloned organs were being grown. However, like the skin grafts, it would be many days before they would be ready. Rampant infection and massive heart failure brought on by traumatic shock were a constant threat while she was hooked onto the machines. And even if she survived another week, the strain of the numerous surgeries necessary to repair all the damage might be more than her ravaged body could endure. She was resting peacefully right now. The doctors had put her into a light drug-induced coma to allow all of her energy to be focused on healing. If she responded to treatment, she would come out of the coma spontaneously in 3 or 4 days as her condition improved. However, the fact that they were waiting to see if she regained consciousness before beginning work on prosthetic limbs to replace her legs told Saren everything he needed to know about the patient's condition. For all the miracles of medical science, organic life was still delicate and fragile, and it wasn't likely this woman was going to survive. But Saren didn't need her to survive. She was a witness to what had happened at Datan, the only living witness. They had identified her by cross-referencing genetic material with an employee databank. She was a low-level worker in the accounting department, and all Saren wanted was to ask her one question. He took the syringe the doctor had reluctantly prepared at his order and plunged it into one of the intravenous lines. It was highly unlikely this woman knew anything about the attack on Datan, and even less likely she knew anything about Sidone. But everyone else on duty at the plant was dead, and Saren had a hunch her survival was more than just blind luck. Maybe she had some warning, some knowledge none of the others did that had almost enabled her to escape unscathed. It was a long shot, but one he was more than willing to take. One of the machines began to beep loudly, responding to her rapidly quickening heart rate as the Spectre pushed the amphetamines into her systems. Her body began to quiver, then tremble, then went rigid and stiff as she sat bolt upright. Her eyelids shot open, though the orbs beneath had been cooked blind by the fires. She tried to scream, but the only sound her charred throat and lungs could produce was a rasping wheeze, barely audible from behind her ventilator mask. Still sitting up, her body went into seizure, rattling the tubes in the metal frame of her hospital bed as she thrashed uncontrollably. After several seconds, she fell back, exhausted and spent, panting for breath, her blind eyes closed once more. Saren leaned in close to her melted ears, speaking loudly so she could hear him.
Jella! Jella! Turn your head if you can hear me.
At first there was nothing, then her head moved feebly from one side to the other.
I need to know who did this. I just want a name. Do you understand? Just tell me the name.
He reached over and lifted her breathing mask so she could speak. Her lips moved, but nothing came out.
Jella! Louder, Jella! Don't let the bastards get away with it. Who did this to you?
Satisfied, he replaced her breathing mask and pulled a second syringe from his pocket. This one would put her back into the coma, giving her at least a fighting chance for survival. He hesitated before administering it. As a Spectre, he was familiar with the reputation of the man she'd identified. A ruthless businessman who operated on both sides of Batarian law. Adan had always been careful not to involve himself in anything that would draw the attention of the Council or its agents. He had never shown any interest in artificial intelligence research before. Saren's train of thought was momentarily broken by the sound of Jella coughing and gagging in her bed. Dark specks spattered the inside of the ventilator mask, blood and pus expelled from her lungs with each choking breath. There was more to the raid on Sidon than Batarian nationalism or anti-human terrorism, he realized. Adan didn't mix politics and business. And it wasn't just about money. Adan had plenty of other ways to make a profit that didn't incur the risk of Spectre involvement. There was something strange going on here, something he wanted to investigate in more depth. Jella's body began to convulse. The beeping of the machines became a single high-pitched whine as her stats dropped below critical levels. Saren stood motionless, watching as her numbers plummeted while he considered his next course of action. Adan had built a magnificent mansion near the city of Ujan, Kamala's capital. Saren doubted he'd find him there now. Adan was a careful, cautious man. Even if he was sure nobody knew about his connection to Sidon, he'd have gone into hiding the very moment he learned someone survived the attack, just to be safe. He could be anywhere by now. No, Saren corrected himself, ignoring the frantic beeping of the machines and the violent spasms still rocking Jella's body. Adan wouldn't have risked trying to clear port security. Not if there was even the slimmest chance someone already knew about his involvement, which meant he was probably still hiding somewhere on Kamala. But there were plenty of places Adan could hide on this world. He controlled a number of mining and refinery operations, enormous plants spread across the entire surface of the planet. Most likely, he was holed up at one of these. The problem was figuring out which one. There were literally hundreds of those facilities on Kamala. It would take months to properly search them all. And Saren suspected he didn't have that kind of time. Jella was still thrashing uncontrollably, trapped in the throes of her ravaged body's desperate struggle to survive. But she was growing weaker now. Her strength ebbing away, Saren idly twirled the hypodermic that might save her between his fingers, still considering the problem of Adan as he waited for her to expire. It had been obvious the humans didn't know who was behind the attacks, so Saren didn't see any reason to share this latest information with the Council. At least not yet. He'd tell them about the illegal AI research at Sidon, of course. It would cause serious trouble for the Alliance and draw attention away from his own continuing investigation into Adan's involvement. But until he knew exactly why the Batarian considered the rewards of this mission worth the incredible risk, he'd keep Adan's name out of the reports. Now all he had to do was figure out how to find him. 2 minutes later, Jella was finally still. The Turian checked her body for any signs of life, confirming what the monitors already told him: she was gone. Only now did he take the syringe and inject it into the IV, knowing it was too late to have any effect. Then he carefully placed the empty needle in plain view on a small table near the bed. He walked slowly to the door, unlocked it, and turned the knob. Outside, the doctor in charge of Jella was waiting, pacing anxiously in the hall. He turned to face the Turian as he emerged from the room.
"We heard the machines. Is she alright? What's going on here?"
You are right. Jella was too weak. She didn't make it.
Ambassador Goyle marched purposefully across the rolling green fields of the Presidium toward the Citadel Tower, rising up in the distance. Her brisk, compact strides at odds with the gentle serenity of her surroundings. The tranquil beauty of the simulated sunshine reflected on the central lake did nothing to calm her mood. She'd received Anderson's warning less than an hour before she'd been given the summons to appear in front of the Council. The timing couldn't be coincidence. They knew about the AI research, and that meant there was going to be hell to pay. By the time she reached the base of the tower, she knew there was only one option. She had to go on the attack. A scale model statue of a mass relay stood off to her left, a 20-foot-tall replica of the Prothean's greatest technological achievement that welcomed visitors approaching the heart of the galaxy's most magnificent space station. It was a striking piece of art, but the ambassador was in no mood to stop and admire it. She marched up to the guards standing at the tower's only entrance, then waited impatiently while they confirmed her identity. She was pleased to note that one of the guards was human. The number of humans employed in critical positions throughout the Citadel seemed to grow every day, further evidence of how valuable her species had become to the galactic community in only a few short years. It strengthened her resolve as she entered the elevator that would rocket her up the outside of the tower to the council chamber. The elevator was transparent. As she shot heavenward, she could see the whole of the Presidium stretched out beneath her. As she climbed even higher, she could see beyond the edges of the Citadel's inner ring. In the distance were the flickering lights of the wards extending out of sight along the Citadel's 5 arms. The view was spectacular, but the ambassador did her best to ignore it. It was no accident that the grandeur of the Citadel was on full display here. Though they held no official power, the 3 individuals who made up the council were, for all intents and purposes, the rulers of the civilized galaxy. The prospect of meeting them face to face was a humbling experience, even for someone as politically savvy as the Alliance's top ambassador. And she knew enough to understand that the long elevator ride to the apex of the tower had been carefully crafted to make visitors feel awed and overwhelmed long before they ever got to meet the council itself. In less than a minute, she was at the top, her stomach lurching slightly at the deceleration as the elevator slowed, then stopped. Or maybe it was just nerves. The doors opened and she stepped into the long hallway that served as an anteroom to the council chamber. At the end of the hall was a broad staircase leading up, with wide passages branching off to either side at its foot. 6 honor guards, 2 Turian, 2 Salarian, and 2 Asari, a pair of each species represented on the council, stood at attention along either wall. She passed them by without acknowledging their presence. They served no purpose beyond pomp and circumstance. One step at a time she climbed the stairs. As she ascended, the walls fell away, revealing the glory of the council chamber. It resembled the Roman amphitheaters of ancient Earth, a large oval with seats for thousands of spectators lining each side. Built into the floor on either end were raised platforms hewn from the same virtually impervious material that made up the rest of the station. The stairs she was climbing right now would bring her to the top of one of these platforms, the petitioner's stage. From here she would look across the vast chamber to the opposite stage, where the council would be seated to hear her case. As the ambassador stepped out onto the petitioner's stage and approached the podium, she was relieved to see that none of the spectator seats were occupied. Although their decision would be made public, it was obvious the council wanted to keep the exact nature of this meeting with the Alliance secret. That further strengthened her resolve. Part of her had feared this would be nothing but a spectacle for public show, with no chance for her to defend the actions of humanity. At the far end, the members of the council were already seated. The Asari counselor was in the center, directly across from Ambassador Goyle. To her left, Goyle's right, was the Turian counselor. To the Asari's right was the Salarian representative. Above each of them was a 5-meter-tall holographic projection of their head and shoulders, allowing petitioners to clearly see the reactions of each individual council member, despite the distance between the 2 stages.
There's no need for pretense here. We have been informed by one of our agents, a Spectre, that humanity was conducting illegal AI research at one of its facilities in the Skillian Verge. That facility was destroyed. Dozens of human lives were lost in an unprovoked attack. That is not the purpose of this audience. We are only here to talk about Sidon itself.
Ambassador, surely you understand the dangers artificial intelligence represents to the galaxy as a whole.
The Alliance took every conceivable precaution with our research at Sidon. We have no way to know that but your word, and you've already proved how unreliable your species can be. This is not meant to be an attack upon your species. Humanity is a newcomer to the galactic community, and we have done all we can to welcome your species. Like when the Turians conquered Shanxi in the First Contact War?
The Council intervened on humanity's behalf in that conflict. The Turians were escalating their response, assembling their fleets. Millions of human lives would have been lost if not for our intercession.
I was in full support of the Council's actions then. Unlike some of my species, I bear no ill will toward humanity or the Alliance, but I also do not believe you should be given preferential treatment. When we invited humanity to become part of Citadel space, you agreed to be bound by the laws and conventions of this council. You only want to make an example of us because we're pushing the Batarians out of the Verge. I know their embassy has threatened to secede from the Citadel if something isn't done.
We heard their case, but we did not take any action. The Verge is unclaimed territory, and it is the policy of the Council not to become involved in regional disputes unless they will have widespread impact throughout Citadel space. We seek to preserve the autonomy of every species in all matters except those that threaten the galaxy as a whole.
Like your research into artificial intelligence. You can't be naive enough to think humanity is the only species investing in this. It is not naivety, but rather wisdom that leads us to think this.
Your people were not here to see the fall of the Quarians at the hands of the Geth. The dangers of creating intelligent synthetic life, in any form, were never more clearly illustrated. Humanity simply doesn't understand that the risks are just too great.
Risk? The only risk is burying your heads in the sand and hoping this all goes away. The Geth are still out there. Synthetic life is a reality. The creation of a true AI, maybe an entire race of them.
is inevitable. They might even be out there somewhere already, just waiting to be discovered. If we don't study synthetic life now, in a controlled setting, how can we ever hope to understand it? We understand there are risks inherent to the creation of synthetic life, but we do not automatically assume that we will have no other choice but to come into conflict with them. That is a conceit of humanity.
Other species embrace the underlying philosophy of mutual coexistence. We see strength in unity and cooperation. Humanity, however, seems to still believe competition is the key to prosperity. As a species, you are aggressive and antagonistic.
Every species competes for power. The only reason you three are able to sit and pass judgment on the rest of the galaxy is because the Council races control the Council fleet.
The Council races commit immeasurable resources in our efforts to ensure widespread galactic peace. Money, ships, and even millions of our own citizens are all freely given in the service of the greater good.
Often the rulings of the Council go against our own species. You know this from experience. The Turians were forced to make heavy reparations to the Alliance after your first contact war, even though it could be argued that the conflict was as much humanity's fault as theirs.
The connection between theoretical philosophy and practical actions is a fine one. We do not deny that individuals on their own, and cultures or species as a whole, will seek to expand their territory and influence, but we believe this is best accomplished with the understanding that there must be reciprocity, what you humans call give and take. This makes us willing to sacrifice for the sake of others. Can you honestly say the same about humanity?
Make any reply. As the top Alliance representative on the Citadel, she'd studied interstellar politics in great depth. She was intimately familiar with every ruling the Council had made in the last 2 centuries, and although there was an ever so subtle bias towards their own peoples in the overall pattern of the Council's decisions, everything they just said was fundamentally true. The Asari, Solarians, and even the Turians had well-deserved reputations for selflessness and altruism on a galactic scale. It was one of the things she still struggled with, this delicate balance the other races maintained between self-interest and the collective well-being of every species who swore allegiance to the Citadel. The integration and amalgamation of new alien cultures into the interstellar community was almost too easy. It seemed unnatural. She had a theory that it was somehow connected to the underlying Prothean technology that was common to every spacefaring species. It gave them a point of similarity, something to build on. But then why hadn't humanity adapted as smoothly as everyone else?
We didn't come here to argue politics. What are you planning to do about Sedone?
There was no point dragging this out. There was nothing she could do to change the Council's mind anyway.
There will have to be sanctions against humanity and the Alliance. This is a serious crime. The penalties must reflect that.
Maybe this is just part of the process of assimilating humanity into the interstellar community, Goyle thought warily. A gradual and inevitable evolution that will bring the Alliance into line with the rest of the species who answer to the Council.
As part of these sanctions, the Council will appoint a number of representatives to monitor Alliance activity throughout the Verge.
Maybe we're just fundamentally different from most other species, Goyle thought, only half listening to the judgment being handed down. Maybe we don't fit in because there's something wrong with us. There were a few other species, like the Krogan, that were warlike and hostile at their core. In the end, the Krogans had suffered for it, incurring the wrath of the rest of the galaxy, decimating their numbers and leaving them a scattered, dying people. Was this to be humanity's fate as well?
These appointed Council representatives will also conduct regular inspections of all Alliance facilities and colonies, including Earth, to ensure you are in compliance with the laws and regulations of the Citadel.
Maybe we are antagonistic. Humanity was certainly aggressive, not to mention assertive, determined, and relentless. But were these really flaws? The Alliance has spread farther and faster than any other species before them. By her estimations, the Alliance would have the power to rival the council races themselves in 20 or 30 years. And suddenly, it all made sense. They're scared of us. The fatigue and weariness that had overwhelmed Ambassador Goyle only moments before vanished, swept away by the single stunning revelation. They're actually scared of us.
No!
No? No what?
I do not accept these terms.
She had almost made a terrible mistake. She had let these aliens manipulate her, twist her mind until she doubted herself and her people. But she wasn't about to grovel before them now. She wasn't about to apologize for humanity acting human.
This is not a negotiation. That's where you're wrong,
she said with a fierce smile. Humanity had chosen her as their representative, their champion. It was her duty to defend the rights of every man, woman, and child on Earth and across Alliance space. They needed her now, and she would fight for them.
Ambassador, perhaps you fail to understand the gravity of the situation. You're the ones who don't understand. These sanctions you're proposing will cripple humanity. The Alliance will not allow this to happen. I will not allow this to happen. Do you really think humanity can defy the Council? Do you honestly believe your people could triumph in a war against our combined forces? No, but we wouldn't go down easy. And I don't think you're willing to go to war over something like this. Not with us. The cost would be too high. Too many ships and lives lost in a conflict we all want to avoid. Not to mention the impact it would have on all the other species. We're the dominant force in the Skyllian Verge and the Attican Traverse. Alliance expansion drives the economies of those regions. Alliance ships and soldiers help maintain order out there.
From the expressions on their respective holographic projections, the ambassador could see she'd hit a nerve. Eager to press her point, she kept speaking before any members of the council could respond.
Humanity is a major trade partner with half a dozen other species in Citadel space, including each of your races. We make up over 15% of the population here on the Citadel, and there are thousands of humans working on CSEC and Citadel control. We've been part of the galactic community for less than a decade, and we're already too important, too essential for you to simply force us out.
Continued her tirade, still talking even as she drew in a much-needed breath, a technique she'd mastered early on in her political career.
I'll admit, we made a mistake. There should be some type of penalty. But humans take risks. We push the boundaries. That's who we are. Sometimes we're going to go too far, but that still doesn't give you the right to slap us down like overly strict parents. Humanity has a lot to learn about dealing with other species, but you have just as much to learn about dealing with us. And you better learn fast, because we humans are here to stay.
When the ambassador finally stopped, a stunned silence fell over the council chamber. The three representatives of the galaxy's most powerful government looked at each other, then shut off their microphones and the holographic projectors to hold a brief conference in private. From the other side of the room, it was impossible for Goyle to read their expressions or hear what they were saying without any amplifying technology. But it was clear there was a much-heated debate. The meeting lasted several minutes before they reached some kind of accord and switched their mics and holographic projectors back on.
What kind of penalties are you suggesting, Ambassador?
Goyle wasn't sure if the question was sincere, or if they were trying to lure her into some kind of trap. If she suggested something too light, they might just dismiss her and force humanity to accept the original terms. Consequences be damned.
Monetary fines, of course.
She began, trying to determine the bare minimum they would consider accepting. Although she wouldn't admit it, Goyle knew it was important to discourage all other species from illegal AI research as well.
We'll agree to sanctions, but they have to be specific, limited in scope, region, and duration. We'll oppose anything unilateral on principle alone. Our advancement as a society cannot afford to be hindered by overbearing restrictions.
I can have a team of Alliance negotiators ready tomorrow to work out the details of something we can all live with.
And what about the inspectors appointed to oversee Alliance operations?
He'd made it a question, a request instead of an order. That's when Goyle knew she had them. They weren't ready to dig in their heels over this, and it was clear she was.
That's not going to happen. Like many species, humans are a sovereign people. We won't stand for foreign investigators peeking over our shoulders at every little thing we do.
The ambassador knew they'd probably increase the number of intelligence operatives monitoring human activity instead, but there was nothing she could do about that. Every species spied on everyone else. It was the nature of government, an integral cog in the political machine. And everyone knew the Council played the espionage and information-gathering game as well as anyone. But having to escalate Alliance counterintelligence activities was a damn sight better than granting unrestricted access to a team of officially appointed Citadel observers. There was another long pause, though this time the Council didn't bother to confer. In the end, it was the Asari who broke the silence.
Then for now, that is how we shall proceed. Negotiations from both sides will meet tomorrow. This meeting of the Council is adjourned.
Goyle gave a demure nod of her head, keeping her expression carefully neutral. She'd won a major victory. There was no benefit in gloating over it. But as she made her way back down the stairs at the petitioner's stage and headed toward the elevator that would take her back to the Presidium, a sly, self-satisfied smile crept across her lips.